Well, hello, everybody. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastically wonderful day. Hey, real quick, I found some treasures while reading the word lately, and I just want to share something ridiculous. I was trying to explain to my wife something that I think we hear all the time as we're reading along in the scriptures, or we just these phrases about idolatry, like what idols really are, and what like our heads, what pops into our minds versus what reality actually is. Because when we read ancient historical texts, we lack context like crazy. And because of that, we interject what we would assume to be this kind of we've all been brainwashed with this idea that people of old were kind of stupid, kind of dumb, cavemen. The whole scientism, dogma, religion of people evolving out of this ether pond scum goop and turning into some kind of primordial ooze that then turned into self organizing chemistry, came together and spawned life. That stuff. You all learned it, more or less. I'm almost certain. Because of that, you're brainwashed to believe that things have been evolving from simple things to complex things ever since then. And we're only getting better. And everything else before us was basically foolish. However, shocking, everything you've basically ever heard in your life was a lie. Super serious paradigm shift. I know there's some things that you're holding on to right now. And you're like, certainly not. Most assuredly so. I'm telling you. It's like if it's not rooted and grounded in like the actual authentic, reliable historical text known as the scriptures on one foundational plane of it, it's spurious. Like it's most likely came from the actual living adversaries of the kingdom of truth, like the literal immortals who have waged day and night a constant battle. They don't sleep. They don't sleep. So they fight way better than almost all of us because, we get tired, we get worn out. Like, full disclosure, I got pretty worn out over the last month and a half, 2 months. Got pretty worn out. I've been doing a lot of interviews, a lot of it. And a lot of it, I'm talking about the same horrible stuff over and over and over again. It's not exactly what you sign up for. But on the other side of it, I wrote a book about it. Just no one really regarded it for 5, 6 years. And then all of a sudden, there was a lot of people that were regarding it, want to hear more about it. So I got to be faithful to that. On the other side of it, though, because of that, I've also started connecting with some other hosts of shows that are superb. They're absolutely fantastic. And they're diving into all kinds of topics that I'm really passionate about because lots of stuff that I wrote about previously, like in Snatched from the Flames and topics that I address in there, those were just designed to be kind of launching points of research, not just for myself, but for those that would be kind of inclined to study it out from there. I reference a lot of books as I go along because those were key components that helped me to kind of dismantle this spidery web of deception that had been insidiously sown over so many areas of my life. And these were tools that were very beneficial for me to get there. One of them, I'm revisiting a few of those because I recognize that those were launching pads. Those weren't supposed to be the places that I just, tapped into at one point and moved on. Like we've been talking a lot about in the War of the Ages series that we're going through. Dr. Michael Lake's The Sharif Imperative and his Understanding the Kingdom series, like I referenced last time, those were incredibly pivotal for me. And that's why I'm going back to it. But on another one of those that I've been going back into is because some of these folks, like I do shows with guys like one of them I've done quite a few with is SGT Report. I can't post those here. So if you guys are looking for those, you can go over to like my Rumble channel or snatchfromtheflames.com if you want to watch those because they keep getting taken down and I get strikes. And so it's like something that's just, people censorship is serious. Anyways, it's because it's an actual war, like a real war. And part of that war is to control information, right? Controlling information is imperative when you are somebody who has built your house on deception and lies. So when somebody comes along bringing forth a message that dismantles those lies, that shows the true person or persons behind the curtain, your impetus is to absolutely veil that and cover that up. So one of the books though that I referenced quite often is The Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne. Now I've been going back through this to try to glean from here some really important areas because I get asked a very consistent question series by people that want to hear my testimony or talk about these topics because it's clear that there's an absence of understanding, especially when it comes to some of the deceptions like Luciferianism, Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism. Like, where do these things come from? Where do our rule, the globalist ideology, right? Where do these things come from? Right now, there's a lot of conversation going on because of things like talks by Davos and a lot of the world's elite governors of the world, agents of evil on one side of the equation. What is it they're actually talking about? Well, these are some of those talking heads we are going to talk about. They've been around forever, okay? These are people under the influence of these immortals behind the scenes, right? These other spiritual realm have to have physical corporate bodies to enact their will and their agenda. And so they do that by beguiling agents, people on this earth, like Agent Smiths. You know what I'm saying, yo? There's a Matrix reference if you're not familiar with it. The Gnostic doctrine sewn in there as well. However, the understanding that there is this body of physical people on this world who are in line, who have yoked themselves, better word for it. They've literally bound themselves to these immortals and their agendas. They've been taken like fully captive by them. They literally are a captive audience. Okay. When you're sitting in a room with people that cannot get their minds outside of the status quo, you're sitting there. It's because you're dealing with people that are stuck inside that same paradigm and they can't come out of it in any way. But we were reading this week on Shabbat, you know, that fourth commandment, the weapon. It's literally like the seventh day is should always make you think of a weapon. Hold on a second. Let me grab a weapon. It should make you think of this like an actual tool, like a weapon of war. Okay, this is a bolo, right? These are this is made by the United States military back when we were, you know, entering the colonial empire building days of the Americas, when the United States really was going out to be the global policeman. This is when the collective ideology of Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucianism's New Atlantis vision began to really have some meat to it, when they got the United States to become the enforcer, right? And then we started conquering territories all over the world, right? One of those territories was the Philippines, and the Philippines have a particular type of jungle warfare environment that you've got to work your way through. And this is like one of the preeminent tools with which to engage in that scenario. Okay, this is a incredibly thick blade. You know what I'm saying here? It's a chopper, right? The most natural instinct for somebody when they're in a difficult situation is to chop. You can do this. It's not as natural to thrust. Hence why the vast majority of tools I recommend are in this category of life. It's just a default mechanism. It's a highly successful and effective tool for chopping limbs off of stuff, you know, branches, trees, and foliage, briars, thistles, that kind of stuff. But anyways, this was made back in like 1903, 1909. This is a replica, a modern recreation of it that was put out by Windlass. And they have this like line of it. I couldn't find this. I looked for 2 or 3 months to try to find this because the original versions of these are like $400 or $500, and I'm not in that. I don't swing in that wheelhouse. But this was put out like an exact replica, and I found it on like BDK, something like that. Anyways, it was one of the few ones I could actually find of it. But it's an incredibly effective tool. It's really made to be a tool to assist you in really hard environments, really tough situations. This is like a literal battle weapon. You know what I'm saying? You could fight wars with this. Small wars, hand-to-hand wars predominantly, but you could seriously do it, and people have been doing it for a long time. This is like really critical piece of the kit of warfare. Like they're real weapons that we're fighting against. There's real enemies with real serious, powerful tools that they have in order to combat and engage us in a serious combat that we are engaged in here. And we were reading earlier this week on the Sabbath, that day where we have this, like, I really believe the Sabbath, you guys, if you could look at it for a moment and understand, it's a weapon like that. It is powerful, it's sharp, and it's incredible at cutting off the day-to-day life. Like, it's to help you set apart your life. You know what I'm saying? That's when I think of the Sabbath, that's what I think of it like. And that's why it's there in the 10 Commandments. Anyway, something to consider for yourselves, that it's a day where you rest, and by doing so, it's like you're literally getting a weapon from the creator of the heavens and the earth. Anyways, as we were doing that, I've been praying for, like, you know, insights and revelation and understanding. And as we were reading, my wife and I have been journeying through the life of Abraham. Now we're into Joseph or Jacob, and we're in that time frame right now. We're explaining this stuff to my girls, and we were reading in there. Let's jump in here for a second. Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham, the wrestler. Saying he literally wrestles the Messiah. It's crazy stories, you guys, in the scriptures. You'll have a great time here. But anyways, there's this account that takes place when he's like living in the land of with Leah, Rachel. It's a crazy time in his life. He gets there basically naked with nothing but a staff in his hand, and he's like, I got nothing. He shows up at Laban's door, and he's like, hey, I'm Isaac's son. You got any daughters? I saw Rachel. She was wonderful to look upon. So anyways, he decides to work for him. He becomes a shepherd, serious shepherd, savage shepherd, a shepherd with all kinds of downloads of information and critical pieces of wisdom that allow him to be very, very blessed in his flockage. Okay. But way more than you think about, because if you just read the Genesis account, we're going to jump into a couple different books too, those that you may not be as familiar with, but they're fantastically helpful to gain some insight into what's really going on here. But there's this crazy story that goes down as his flocks grow and multiply. All of his, family members, his like in-laws, start to hate him, and they're jealous of him because every time they try to like change his wages, he all of a sudden comes down with even more of a blessing on the types of animals that he was raising up and stuff like that. He's real quick synopsis of it. Jacob is told that his wages are going to be a certain type coloration pattern of sheep, goats. And so every time he chooses that style, those ones are super blessed. They're like crazy fertile. And Laban and his sons are like, what the heck? His flock gets more and more powerful while Laban's flock gets weaker and weaker. And Jacob had this like incredible insight. Yaakov's like, I believe this is stuff that the father gave him, wisdom for the circumstances that he was dealing with, because Laban was being schemy with him, cunning like a serpent. Laban is like the embodiment of the serpent religions coming into his life. He's the Luciferian working against him. Believe me, we're going to show that in profound ramifications. He's the New World Order in Jacob's life. Dead serious. Check this out. Laban is a sorcerer in a totally different kind of way. You're going to see this in a moment here. But they cannot figure out why Jacob is continually getting blessed. Jacob, on the other hand, is literally figured out that if he throws certain sticks into the water, okay, you've cut branches off of a tree with your super savage machete, I'm sure, very similar to what Yaakov had, and you peel the bark off them, and exposes this inner bark and this incredibly medicinal part of the plant. Okay. When he throws that into the water troughs for his flock, like the striped ones, all the striped ones are going to be his pay, his wages. They all reproduce like crazy, but then he takes them out when the weak ones show up, and he's like, I don't want those to be fruitful and multiply. You know what I'm saying? So as he does this, his flock increases and gets stronger, and the other flocks are like getting weaker and weaker. Well, there's a description in the book of Jasher. We're going to talk about that. There's one of these books I absolutely am a huge fan of. I know there's all kinds of ridiculous, like, nah, out there, whatever. You guys can read it for yourselves. Have a firm foundation in the scriptures, the 66 books as you've been given to them. But there was a whole lot more before that in the 1611 King James Version. That's what we're going to be reading from, some of these other books, which were included in the original Apocrypha section of the King James Bible. However, test them for yourselves, you guys. I like to, and I find great benefit in doing so. However, I've also been rooted for a long time in the basic foundational doctrines of the scriptures, and I'm able to test when a book's got all kinds of wonky, crazy, Gnostic doctrines of demons inside of it. This one I've read thoroughly multiple times, and I've never found anything egregious in there that is absolutely contradictory towards the main core tenets of the scriptural doctrine, if that makes sense. So, the book of Jasher, one of my favorites. Check this out here. This is the chapter 31. And Jacob served Laban 6 years longer. Why didn't I just share the screen with you guys so you can see this? Let me show you where I found this. Some of you might want to read it for yourself here. How about I share the screen? Check this out. Come along with me on a journey. This is from Sacred Texts. This is from Sacred Texts, sacred-texts.com. You can find all kinds of these books on here. And a lot of these you can just download straight up from PDF and you can have for yourself, print them out, or you can just find other collections of them. All right. Okay, we're just going to pick up here. Chapter 31. And Jacob served Laban 6 years longer. And when the sheep brought forth, Jacob removed from them such as were speckled and spotted, as he had determined with Laban. And Jacob did so at Laban's for 6 years. And the man increased abundantly. And he had cattle and maidservants and menservants, camels and asses. And Jacob had 200 drove of cattle. That's like herds of cattle, okay? Like big groups, flocks of cattle. And his cattle were of large size and of beautiful appearance and very productive. And all the families of the sons of men desired to get some of the cattle of Jacob, for they were exceedingly prosperous. And many of the sons of men came to procure some of Jacob's flock. And Jacob gave them a sheep for a manservant or a maidservant, or for an ass or a camel, or whatever Jacob desired from them, they gave him. And Jacob obtained riches and honor and possessions by means of these transactions with the sons of men, and the children of Laban envied him of this honor. This is the fundamental crux of what comes down here, okay? Envy. You can never miss this here. We're going to jump back in there in a second, you guys, but just, you can never lose sight of this. Fundamentally, the issue, the core tenet of what we're battling with is there is a class of people that envy the sons of righteousness, the daughters of righteousness. The core fundamental problem of why there is mutual enmity between the children of righteousness, the people that actually want to like maintain morality. You know what I'm saying? Like people that don't want to turn the world into the image of a beast, people that don't want to follow after collectivism and socialism on this completely different scale, that are willing to do whatever it takes in order for the ends to justify the means. That's called Machiavellianism. That was that ideological pursuit we saw expressed itself most thoroughly like the Rosicrucianism. This is the ideology that they pursued. They're trying to create a utopia, a form of order out of chaos that they really believe. This is like some of the quotes from their own books here. So let me jump in here for a second so you guys can get an idea of this. This is on chapter 77 of the Genesis 6 conspiracy. Fantastic. This is like the core tenet of what Rosicrucianism believed. And this came from early books here, okay? This is where the origin story for many of what we would see today as those agents of evil, why they have this driving attitude towards collectivism. Why do they want to unite all men under a single idea, under a single mindset? Sir Thomas More, these are some of the origins of that ideology. Sir Thomas More authored the book Utopia about a magical island, Atlantis, governed by a socialistic, communistic, republican government where all religions were tolerated and all were free to cultivate their intellectual capabilities. Obviously, some major problems with that ideology today, right? Because there are some who are willing to water down the monotheistic ideological pursuits of like the scriptures in order to go along in this collective ideology. There's also the false prophet, the false church, the great horde that's going to water them down and try to unite people, like we see from the Roman Catholic Church. And then there's people on the Christian side who are willing to do similarly, right? The people that are exalted and honored, right? As these are the pastors of America and such. They're willing to go along with that agenda. Okay. These are people that have submitted to this totalitarian ideology and have bowed themselves and put on the Templars robes. They've bowed themselves and kissed the Pope at the ring of the Pope. They've all kinds of compromised that's insidiously sown themselves into the ranks of these different methods with which the enemy is pursuing the religious side of this war. Okay, there's another very important person who had huge impacts on the world. Okay, and his name is Francis Bacon. Finally, we consider the infamous and notorious Sir Francis Bacon, who wrote La Nova Atlantis, a story of a republic headed by a secret society of intellectuals from the fields of letters and sciences. The members of this secret society referred to each other as brothers, who were devoted in complete freedom to philosophical discussions to improve the conditions of the lower classes and to advance the true religion. As previously revealed, Bacon was a member of the Rosicrucian Society. The fundamental like origin stories of this Rosicrucianism was they believed in this guy named Johann Valentin Andrea, or he's as his pen name as others called him earlier. He wrote these books, Christian Rosicrucian. He wrote these books that were called Fama Fraternities and Discovery of the Fraternity of the Most Noble Order of the Rosy Cross. In there, they laid out the establishment of a perfect utopian society based off science, mystical faith, and reason. This is really important because when you hear reason, when you hear sciences, your mind is going to be brainwashed to consider the ways of the worldly sciences, the intellectual sciences that you would think about at colleges and universities. The sciences they're referring to here are the ones that were warned about in the scriptures, which is like in 1 Timothy, like he literally sits there, Paul is warning. He says, he instructed Timothy to teach against the false doctrine that encouraged deviations from and beliefs that did not conform to the glorious gospel of God, to avoid profane and vain babblings and opposition of science falsely so called. That's 1 Timothy 1:3. That science falsely so called is also this Gnosticism, this false doctrine, this false illuminism. Okay, this is the pursuit and the endeavor of religion through knowledge. This is the crux of where so many of those things have their origins. So when we go back to the scriptures, we're going to find this from Genesis 3 all the way through the entirety of the scriptures. There is these other people who are willing to use ends justify the means ideological pursuits in order to advance their kingdom on this earth, no matter the cause. And they're at their heart of it at war with the people of truth. And this is like the Apostle Paul was speaking to this global Gnosticism and mysticism when he said, But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning or gnosis, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, that is the Jesus, the other Jesus that they preach. This is the heart of Gnosticism. It's another deity. It's another God. And there's a lot of people right now embracing this whole thing, and they're throwing out the Messiah in a serious way. They're pursuing Gnosticism without their relative understanding of it, but they're pursuing it nonetheless. But this is the core tenet of that war. There is always going to be a faction behind the scenes that seeks to destroy the people who possess the true way of life. They don't want anybody to find it because they envy the immortality that's promised to us. There's an absolute immortality that's promised to those that believe in the Messiah and hold fast to his teaching, his doctrines, and cling to the word of truth, and they don't deviate from it. So the entire society is collectively being pushed in an engineered direction to destroy the people, to literally take from them their core understanding of reality, to strip them of the basic understanding of where these things came from. That's what we're dealing with. And you know what? It's never not been this way. It really has always been like this, you guys, for every person who has ever tried to pursue a set apart lifestyle that walks in sincerity of truth and their conviction. There is always adversaries to that pursuit. And more often than not, they are in positions of power and influence because they mutually promote each other. Okay. Jacob is living in a time and in a society in Laban's house. Okay. Laban is somebody who practices the same type of demonic doctrinal pursuits. We find this out even in Genesis. We'll go to Genesis 31. I'll read it from there first so you get an idea of it. And then we're going to explain what these words actually mean. Okay. Now, Jacob is basically realizing things are not going well. The countenance of Laban and his sons is against him. They're becoming adversaries towards him, and they're wanting to take his stuff. Okay, this is, they're like, we're going to seize all your assets. You know what I'm saying? We're going to garner your wages, that kind of stuff. Now, so Elohim, oh, we're ready? Here we go. And it came to be at that time when the flocks conceives that I've lifted up my eyes and looked in a dream. Oh, hold on a second. We'll just jump a little bit further ahead. Jacob gets a supernatural warning from Yahuwah Elohim. So don't ever mess around, you guys. Jacob got the revelation for how to like grow and multiply his flocks from dreams. Pay attention. Pray for dreams, revelation, insight, understanding. And the messenger of Elohim spoke to me in a dream, saying, Yaakov. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes now and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the El of Bethel, where you anointed the standing column and where you made a vow to me. Now rise up, get out of this land, and return to the land of your relatives. And Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as strangers? For he has sold us and also entirely consumed our silver. For all the wealth which Elohim has taken from our father is ours and our children's. Now then, do whatever Elohim has told you. So Yaakov rose and put his sons and his wives on camels, and he drove off all his livestock and all his possessions which he had acquired, his property of the livestock which he had acquired in Padan Aram, and to go to his father Yitzhak in the land of Canaan. And when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole the house idols that were her father's. That verse right there, if you just fly over it, makes no sense. And you're like, what the heck is wrong with Rachel? Like, why is she stealing their idols? You know what I'm saying? And this leads to a little bit of a showdown later on because Laban is like, what the heck? He comes home, everyone's missing. I should just read it. I'm going to read it, okay? Now I'm going to read it from Jasher now for a second because it's going to jump you into what we're talking about here, okay? Let's go back here. We can go back over to Jasher. Because when you hear household idols, you're going to think of some Buddha-ish looking statue. You're going to think of this stuff. Let me show you. This is what's going to pop into your mind. The word in Hebrew there is teraphim. Teraphim, okay? That's important. This is why it's important to be able to look up words for yourself. Because if you don't, you just hear household idols and you're going to think of those little statues of Mary and you're going to be like, wow, all these Catholic saints and all this. You're going to think of that kind of basic idolatry. There's a lot more going on here to the story. It's really imperative for you to understand these things because this is how they beguile us without us being taught clear understanding of what's taking place. Contextually, when somebody 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago read anything like this, they would have had a very different understanding of what was taking place. 2500 BC or 2,500 years ago, people would have been like, oh, yeah, teraphim. Totally. Oh, yeah, I know. Jesse's dad's got one on his mantle. I've seen it. I've heard it talk too. These things actually talked. They weren't just some kind of statue that was breathless. But if you look up teraphim and you look up like images of it, you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's what it is. This is what would pop into most people's minds. You're like, oh, teraphim, household idols or teraphim. There you go. Doesn't look so scary, right? Doesn't look so bad. You're like, oh, that's it. Just carved images, some kind of clay stuff. Look like people, gods, goddesses, whatever. It's like not a big deal. And you're like, okay, I guess that's what it is. So you think that's what it is. But then you read for yourself. If you actually read for yourself, you find out it's way more than that. And it's way worse than that. And it's all kinds of stuff. So from this point on through the rest of scripture, when you hear household idols or images, this is what they're talking about. Okay. And Yahweh appeared to me. Oh, we're going to just jump down. And Rachel stole her, verse 40, and Rachel stole her father's images, teraphim. And she took them and concealed them upon the camel upon which she sat, and she went on. And this is the manner of the images, in taking a man who is the firstborn and slaying him, taking the hair off of his head, and taking salt and salting the head and anointing it in oil, then taking a small tablet of copper or a tablet of gold and writing the name upon it, and placing the tablet under his tongue, and taking the head with the tablet under the tongue, and putting it in the house, and lighting up lights before it, and bowing down to it. And at that time, when they bow down to it, it speaks to them in all matters that they ask of it, through the power of the name which is written in it. And some of them in the figures of men of gold and silver, and go to them in times known to them, and the figures receive the influence of the stars, and tell them future things. And in this manner were the images which Rachel stole from her father. And Rachel stole these images, which were her father's, in order that Laban might not know through them where Jacob had gone. And Laban came home, and he asked concerning Jacob and his household, and he was not to be found. And Laban sought his images to know where Jacob had gone, and could not find them. And he went to some other things, and he inquired of them. And they told him that Jacob had fled from him to his fathers, to the land of Canaan. That's where teraphim show up. That's what teraphim are. So when you read about this, like we're going to read even in Michael, David's wife, has teraphim in his house. David, anointed, chosen, beloved by Yah, has teraphim in his house. His wife inquires by them. This is a serious deal. You're going to read about these all throughout the scriptures in the times of the Israelites and the judges. And this is like a serious stronghold that people will utilize as a means of communing with the heavenly hosts, these other fallen second heaven mighty ones, these other immortals, in order to find out and inquire information, future events, and be able to know what to do and take action on that. This is what the cost of it was sacrificing your a firstborn son. That doesn't mean they did it when they were a baby. That doesn't mean they did it when they were a teenager. It could happen at any point in the course of their life. It could happen when they're very young, and it could happen later on in life. Even as we read about in 2 Kings, when we talked earlier in the series about him sacrificing his firstborn son, the prince, the king of Moab, who should have sat on his throne, he sacrifices him on the wall in front of the army in order to have this demonic horde be able to break out. These disembodied spirits of the Nephilim break out to help him fight back the Israelites that were attacking him. This is something that was practiced on a regular basis. This was normative for people to experience when they wanted to have deities that talked to them. They'd sacrifice their children. This is what they did in order to have that power from these images, these idols. These aren't just something that was sculpted in clay and sat on a shelf. These were things that had a power behind them, like a charged object is what you would call it. This is stuff that people can have in their house as ancestral, like family heirlooms. People go on a trip to Africa and they're going to buy something that's like for them a mask. That's another one that you might see commonly used. It'll have hair and stuff sewn into it, beads put into it. You have no idea, you guys, where some of this stuff's real origins are. Because when you're dealing with shamanism and witchcraft or voodoo, these are carryovers of much of these ideologies in much of these phone book dialings to the occult, to the other side. These are tools that they use in order to practice that stuff. This is the mighty ones. This is the gods that Laban had, okay? Laban was somebody who inquired of these deities in order to do his life. Later on in the story, we read that when he shows up there to Jacob, he accuses him of stealing his teraphim. Obviously, he's like bummed. He's like, you took my daughters and my flocks and all this stuff. But the angel of Yahuwah came to him in a dream the night before and warned him, don't you dare speak good or evil to Jacob. You let him be. Okay. But Jacob is sitting there like hearing all this stuff, and he gets accused of stealing the teraphim because that's what Laban was really pissed about too. He's like, you stole my teraphim. He's like, I didn't touch it. Whoever you find that stuff with, let them be put to death. So he searches through everyone's stuff. He doesn't find it. Rachel conceals those things on her saddle. She's like, I'm having my period, so I can't get down and say hi to you, Dad. So she hides the teraphim from him because she grew up in his house. She was raised, Rachel and Leah were raised in a house of idolatry, just like Abraham was. Abraham was raised by a man named Terah. He was literally under Nimrod as the captain of his host. He was the one who was in charge of all of his diviners, astrologers, all of his mediums and sorcerers, like the ones that led his army. Okay, the priest class behind Nimrod was Terah, father of Abraham. Just understand something. The scriptures have so many accounts of men and women who were born into a house of deep occultism, deep idolatry, deep radical intelligent evil, who then get snatched out of it and who then become some of the most important preachers of righteousness, people who preserved the ways of righteousness, zealots. They become radically committed to the other side. They become double agents against the kingdom of darkness. This is where Rachel and Leah grew up. This is literally what they grew up to be normal. That when dad wants to find out information, he lights up candles in front of the teraphim, who are dead firstborn sons. So we don't know if this was potentially other brothers. The firstborn son of Laban may have been the very person who was sacrificed in order to make this idol speak to them. Okay, understand. That's how horrible evil it is. People are like, we want you to tell us about this horrible stuff you went through. We want you to understand, like, why do people sacrifice their children? This is why. This is what they do. They cut the hands off of people and then turn them into candles. And so they can light them into a candle and then conceal themselves, make themselves invisible. This is a real, it's called a hands of glory. This is real stuff, you guys, that people actually do because it gives them power from this other side that allows them to do nefarious, cunning, deceptive work against people that are ignorant, people that don't know the schemes of the devil. And so they're led captive by the enemy because there's a people who are willing to do this level of evil, wholly committed to the cause, who are willing to do this type of dark stuff in order to achieve their end goals. That's who we're actually battling with. That's why it's important that we take a second when we see all the world headlines of what's going on today. We see all the different driving factors of where they're trying to push us and where they're trying to pull us and everything that's trying to grab your emotions and get you to react into certain ways and certain means. Understand that behind the scenes, if you're ignorant of the ways that these people are receiving their information, where they're actually getting their doctrine from, you're going to be led into a snare that's by design. So be careful when you see them pushing in these certain directions so heavily and so hard. Like the American one, he has a great point in here. This is one of my favorite little points. You've got to know this is where these people get this radical evil from. They are willing to find ways to commune with the dead, commune with these other spirits in order to have access to this. The gods of medicine. This is why the medical establishment is so heavily bent in that direction because its origin is in the serpent. Its origin is in this Gnostic ideology. And so therefore, they are willing to pursue that agenda, the collective agenda, to augment all mankind, to transform us out of the image of our creator and into the image of the beast, because they believe, they follow these tenets. And you may have a hard time believing this, but the doctors, so many of them are under a similar spell. I'm not saying they're all every single individual is under that influence. However, when they swear these Hippocratic oaths, they swear allegiance to a mighty one, another God. The version that the Hippocratic oath that many of them say today has taken out some of the names of these deities, but the core tenet is still there. And because of that, it leaves a door for the adversary to work in their life. And this is why it's so powerful for any of us, not just in the medical establishment, those in the military, those of you who are under secrecy clauses, who have sworn these oaths. Understand the power of renunciation of those oaths so that you're not spiritually bound to them. There's many people who are within these areas that have still maintained their vigilance, who have still preserved the truth, who have guarded the truth, who have not deviated from it, who are still standing on their convictions, and they are absolutely becoming a minority by design. And so we need to pray and intercede that the Father continues to draw people out of these snares, that He would allow them to come to the truth, a knowledge of the truth, that their eyes would be open to being able to see it, that their ears would be open to being able to hear it, so that they could boldly walk against the kingdom of darkness, and they can become servants of righteousness wherever they may be strategically placed at any given time. But even the snake motif that you see on there, okay? Digging back even further into mysticism, mystical Egyptian roots, we arrive back in Mesopotamia, where we find the symbol of wisdom was none other than the symbol of Enki. Enki was affectionately known as the Lord of the Sacred Eye, the all seeing eye of Freemasonry in Egypt, which not surprisingly was represented by a serpent spiraling around a rod, or stem, or staff, or tree of knowledge. One Hebrew word for serpent was nachash, but this word could also be translated as diviner, or he who unveils secrets. Finally, the horned serpent coiled around the staff was the hieroglyphic used by ancient mystery schools for God. The snake motif was inherited by the medical association from Asclepius, the ancient Greek credited with being the father of medicine, and a statue of him ordaining the Capodimonte Museum in Rome includes the same emblem, a staff coiled around by a serpent. Some Roman legends further recorded Asclepius as the god of medicine. Romans knew him as Asclepius, the father god of medicine, a Greek from Thessaly who lived circa 1200 BC. Asclepius' son, Hippocrates, is the famous character of lore that all doctors swear to when they take the Hippocratic Oath. Gardner writes that the ark, oh, he just goes on here for a minute, but this is literally on page, he gives it just straight up. In the same spirit of gnosis supplied from the gods, American, Australian, and British medical associations choose hereafter unexplained mystical emblem to represent their snake associations. Self-admitted from the volume 270 of the Journal of the American Medical Association, the emblem is a serpent coiled around a plant or staff, or more accurately, the tree of knowledge and wisdom. That's a quote from the American Medical Association's journal. The snake in mysticism represents wisdom, just as the serpent led Eve and Adam to the tree of gnosis that was desirable for gaining wisdom. This obscure snake motif is suspiciously similar to Hermes' staff that was entwined by two snakes and depicted with winged sandals, the curious caduceus known as the magic staff. It represents a kind of meditation mediation between heaven and earth, just as the world tree, Mount Hermon, Great Pyramids, and ziggurats did. This is literally the formative ways of tracking and identifying some of our adversaries and where it is that they're getting their information from. Also, for them, it's a way of ascribing loyalty. It's a way of representing that, like, I am loyal to the serpent. I am loyal to the Nahash. This is their way of being able to give indicators of that. These people who are willing to walk in this force of iniquity are really the ones that we are making our collective war against. And we need to understand how we, in our ignorance, have been taken captive by them to do their desires. Many of us have been complicit in building the empire, building the net that's drawing around the necks of so many people today. And by us becoming no longer ignorant of their schemes, we can contend against them. We can become adversaries against them. The reason Jacob, Rachel, and Leah become the literal origin stories, Zilpah and as Bilhah as well, they are literally the house where so much of this house of Israel begins. This is the origin story of them. They were raised in a house of idolatry. We see a carryover of so many of the battles and the deceptions and the generational curses play out in the sons of Jacob over the course of time. And you must understand that's because this is the genetic line. This is the house these people came from. They're still dealing with the generational backlash of these horrible compromises that Laban had made, horrible witchcraft and divination that they had been engaged in growing up. They were around this stuff. Jacob's son still grew up seeing this type of activity taking place, and it still becomes a paganistic root in the house of Israel for generations to come. This is why we are supposed to cast off the sins of our fathers. Like it says in Jeremiah 16, this is my biggest hope, is that we can be a part of this generation. This is the goal, right? That we not only fish for the souls of men, but that we hunt the souls of men, because we understand we have inherited lies. Jeremiah 16. See, I am sending for many fishermen, declares Yahuwah, and they shall fish them. And after that I shall send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and every hill, and out of the holes of the rocks. For my eyes are on all their ways. They have not been hidden from my face, nor has their crookedness been hidden from my eyes. And first I shall repay double for their crookedness and their sin, because they defiled my land with the dead bodies of their disgusting matters, and have filled my inheritance with their abominations. Understand, that's the type of abominations he's talking about. That's the disgusting matters he is talking about here. It's not just some horrible, oh, bad stuff people are doing. He's talking about people that sacrifice their children in order to talk to demons. That's what he's talking about. That's disgusting. That's utterly detestable. But this is the thing his children, the sons of Israel, are doing. They have literally been taken captive by this sons of the serpent and by these beguilers and these diviners. This other priest class would come back in, and they would absolutely sow in this false doctrine, and people would begin to worship Yahuwah in ways that he said, don't do that. Don't worship me the ways that the pagans do it. Don't you dare. But they would, because they are deceptive and they're subtle and they are seductive. They're very good at influencing people and drawing them into their snares. There is a lot of people. This is literally like I'm watching a falling away in the faith right now. People that I have been friends with for years are falling away from the faith in droves, because all of these doctrines that have been around for a long time, that have been gestating through this seed war in the minds of men, are coming out again, and they are using every weapon they can to draw away the sons of righteousness into embracing forms of false doctrine. And by doing so, they are gaining recruits. They're growing their army every single day. Our way of waging that war is to recruit, 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 is to continue to shine a light on all of the darkness of their deeds, because fundamentally they're like cockroaches. They scatter when you shine the light on them, because they know their deeds are evil and they don't want to come to the light. Like, there are so many evil deeds that are being done all around us, in our churches, in our fellowships. Like, I don't think this time, but next time I'll read for you guys the accounts of what it's like behind the scenes here. Because, a few months ago, we went through an unbelievable, hellish breakdown of trying to expose radical evil that was taking place in fellowships and things that were taking place out in Missouri. And you know what? It was everywhere, though. We had emails pouring in from all over the country of people who were having sexual abuse taking place in the church, in the fellowships, in their Torah communities, all kinds of different little denominations, where people were covering it up and hiding sexual abuse of children over and over and over again. And then, the very people that knew about it did nothing about it, and instead tried to conceal and cover up the crimes and minimize the victims, attack the victims. It's the same tactics that people have been using to discredit whistleblowers and people that come out against anybody. It's disgusting. And I saw so much of it going on for so long. It's grievous. It's really grievous. It's why, for lack of a better, there's no other way to say it. Like, we don't participate in almost any large fellowship of any kind, because every time we go somewhere, we're going to find it. Every time we will find it. We're like bloodhounds that can sniff it out, because I grew up around it. And inevitably it's going to come to the surface, because most people are just ignorant of it. And that's why wolves are able to stay there. They're like, we get along really good here, but sexual immorality in the most devious ways is insidiously sown itself inside the body of the Messiah to defile it, to ultimately defile it, and to try to bring it down. But the good news is we don't have to embrace that anymore. You can break bread with one another and get to know each other in person and at each other's houses, and you can weed out all that kind of filth. But when you start gathering together in larger movements and larger get-togethers, you can't really do that. You can't really vet every single person out in the same way. And so the wolves hide right in there, and it's a very effective strategy. But you know what? As we become no longer ignorant of the schemes of the devil and we begin to expose them and reprove them, we can find out exactly how to combat it. And here's what it says. Jeremiah 16:19. O Yahuwah, my strength and my stronghold, and my refuge in the day of distress. The nations shall come to you from the ends of the earth and say, our fathers have inherited only falsehood, vanity, and there is no value in them. Would a man make mighty ones for himself, which are not mighty ones? Therefore, see, I am causing them to know. This time I am causing them to know my hand and my might, and they shall know that my name is Yahuwah. Our fathers inherited falsehood and vanity. And you know where they inherited that? From the serpent. Okay, let's do some word studies in Genesis 3, because this is just the heart of it all. The entire story of the scriptures plays out in the first four books, first four chapters of the scriptures. Like the whole story is right here. And the more you study it, like actually study it, like go word from word. Like I use that Ernest Klein. I was studying that word beguiled, First Corinthians, Second Corinthians, but this the etymological dictionary of Hebrew language for English readers, Ernest Klein. This has a breakdown of the Hebrew that's not exactly the same as Strong's. A lot of it's very similar. However, there's going to be certain words that have a little more depth because he looks at it from a collective of lots of languages as opposed to just kind of one. But I was looking up that word deceived, right? Because here's what it says, Genesis 3:13. And Yahweh Elohim said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the Nachash deceived me, and I ate. You're like, oh, he tricked her, right? He tricked her. Cunning. This is literally the translation that can be rendered out of that. It says to deceive, to beguile, or emptiness. He imposed upon them vanity and claimed a debt. That's what the Nachash did. He imposed upon Eve vanity. Remember, she looked with her eyes and saw that the tree was pleasing to the eyes and good for food, right? That was the first thing the serpent did. He targeted the woman and he sowed through his tongue vanity into her. That is right there, that stronghold that like so many men and women get taken captive by, because that was the first thing that caught her. That's what got her, was vanity. He is that serpent through this wisdom is the one that does that. And the way that that same doctrine gets other people is through the deception of secret knowledge of this archaic library of that you can come back to, like it talked about later on in that chapter. This literally, Gardner writes that the Ark, according to the Oxford World Library, is an obsolete form of the modern word ark, equivalent to the Latin arca, and thus arcane derives from Latin arca, meaning a box or chest, as in the Ark of the Covenant. He notes that something hidden within a box or chest or ark is additionally called arcane, and that other generative words of arca, such as archive, bring to mind such mysterious hidden treasures, knowledge, and records as the chamber of the archives or the archives of the Masons. Genitive words springing from arca are words such as arch, which spawned other interesting words such as archaic, architecture, arcade, and archon, all of which contain provocative links to Freemasonry, the Templars, and mysticism. Other derivatives, such as archaeology, the science of ancient things, and the critical evaluation of ancient records, suggest to me that one cannot deny the curious link between Arca and Lucifer, the great archon of mysticism. The great architect of the universe dwells in a house of judgment called the Archeon. Arcane is the spurious word. This is literally these promises that people get hooked into, that there's these secret doctrines, these other hidden wisdoms that they can grab onto as a means of ascension, as a means of a path to ascension, that they can rise above this state of man that we've been humbled into, because the people literally believe that we've been trapped as these like mortals, these horrible, suffering little lower class beings, but that latent inside all of us is this divine light, this true knowledge that's inside us, that they can activate it and spark us back through the right unification of all people under a collective mindset, that it'll activate this godhood inside all of us. This is where so much you'll hear people that are into new age, these are concepts that have been sewn in. All of this has its origin stories back with the serpent. These are the same knowledge of the knowledge of tree and evil, this Gnostic gospel that people have been receiving from that moment, and it's been plaguing people ever since then. But you know what, the more that we can root ourselves and ground ourselves in the gospel of the kingdom, in an understanding of the ways of righteousness, we can set ourselves apart from it. Okay, 2 Corinthians 11. I wish that you would bear with me in a little folly, but indeed You are bearing with me, for I am jealous for you with a jealousy according to Elohim. For I gave you in marriage to one husband to present you as an innocent maiden to Messiah. But I am afraid, lest as the serpent deceived Hawa, Eve, by his trickery, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Messiah. For indeed, if he who is coming proclaims another Yeshua, whom we have not proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different good news which you have not received, you put up with it well enough. For I reckon that I am not inferior to the most eminent emissaries. But even if I am unskilled in word, yet not in knowledge, but in every way we have been manifested among you in all matters. Or did I commit sin in humbling myself in order to exalt you because I brought good news, the good news of Elohim to you without being paid? Other assemblies I robbed by receiving wages from them to serve you. And when I was present with you and in need, I was not a burden to anyone. For what was lacking to me, the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied. And in every way I kept myself and shall keep you from being a burden to you. It is a truth of Messiah in me that this boasting in me shall not be stopped in the districts of Acacia. Why is it that I do not love you? Elohim knows. And I shall go on doing as I do in order to cut off the occasion from those desiring an occasion, so that in that which they boast, they might be found also as we are. This is the key component here. Check this out. For such are false emissaries, deceptive workers, masquerading as emissaries of Messiah. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as a messenger of light. It is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Again, I say, let no one think me to be a fool, and if otherwise, at least receive me as a fool. Hold on. That that word there, transforms himself, okay, is meta schizmadzotoi in Greek. It's literally shapeshifters. These are masqueraders. They are dualists. They are wearing cloaks of greed and cloaks of violence. They conceal their actions through good works. All right. So this is the charitable philanthropists, right? These are the people that on one side of it have massive, massive wealth. I'm not talking about millionaires. People look at like the millionaire class of our society as the rich. You have no comprehension of the scale of magnitude of how much more wealth there is for a billionaire to a millionaire. It doesn't even, you can't even comprehend it or visualize it. You really can't. The scale of people that have multiple billions of dollars, right? And generational wealth in the trillions of dollars. There's families who control generational wealth in the trillions of dollars. And then there's families behind those families who control empires. Okay. That's the actual people that we're really dealing with, because they're the ones who are able to institute forms of change through the dissemination of assets that allows their agents, their shot callers on the field, right? Their drug dealers, to be able to change society, to peddle out the doctrines of demons. That's where it comes from. They are on one side looking like they're doing great good. The Shriners are the embodiment of it. They set up hospitals to administer cures to the sick, to people that are poor and cannot afford it. On the other side, they practice radical evil. They're passing their children through the fires. They're doing horrible abomination, detestable things. They are balancing those good deeds between each other because they are following the ways of the serpent. They're following the ways of the dragon, who masquerades as an angel of light. But if he was stripped of his form and people could see him as he is, they would abhor him. But literally, their end is guaranteed. They're false apostles who come in and they infiltrate your churches. They infiltrate the righteous places where people are doing good, where people are sincerely pursuing good things, like people that are in the medical field that are trying to do good. They're going to work their way into that and defile it, destroy it. Like, I have such a desire. My wife worked 10 years in the medical industry. She was a nurse, an RN for 10 years. She has such a passion. She's a nurturer by nature. She loves to nurture things. She loves to see them healed and be restored. I have such a joy to see her be able to be fueled with wisdom to know how to do this. Like, we want her to be able to take like naturopathic courses. I want her to be able to take herbology courses. And like that would be just my joy to be able to see her study and grow in that area, because she wants to, because she recognizes I'm so brainwashed into this way of thinking about how to heal. How, like, what do we do to treat symptoms? As soon as there's a fever, she's like, I always just prescribe drugs. As soon as a fever hit over 102 degrees, drugs. Like every single time. That was like what I was required to do. She's like, it was never taught to let a fever work the body the way it's supposed to. Like this wasn't even taught to her. So she has a desire to learn how to use natural medicines in an effective way to treat problems. Okay. There's so many people that have that good desire in them, but then they have these false apostles, these transformers who come into their life and lead them astray and plug them into the system of Babylon and plug them into the ways of the world. And they're trapped in that. Instead of those natural talents and innate giftings that the Father gave them being used for great good in the saving of many lives, they're instead being a part of being a cog in the machine that advances the kingdom of darkness's agenda everywhere they go. And it's discouraging. It's brutal. But you know what? I really believe the Father can rescue us from those snares of the enemy, that he has the power to snatch us out of that fire and give us our purpose, give us our destiny, to give us our heart's desires. It's not just saying like to give us what we desire, but to give our hearts their desire. When a man's ways are pleasing before Yahuwah, he makes their enemies to be at peace with them. And this is our ultimate desire, is that as we walk out these ways of the kingdom, as we advance the kingdom of righteousness, as we seek to set the captives free from the snares of the devil, we will get to see those people who had been so bound up in iniquity that they could turn from their ways of wickedness, that they could instead use their great influence, use their great assets to turn the kingdom back towards the ways of righteousness. And you know what? It is easy for the Father to make a poor man rich. He can fill somebody who is so full of the foolishness of the wisdom of the world. He can make him poor in the wisdom of righteousness. And you know what? He can instead give him a wisdom of understanding. He can give him a spirit of understanding in a moment. He could turn this entire thing so fast, you guys. In the days of Joseph, when the entire kingdom was set up against them, he gave Pharaoh one dream, two dreams, and it turned the entire world inside out. Literally, two dreams sent to a very powerful person turned the world inside out. And you know what? The Father can send his mighty messengers to give words of understanding, to put the dread of us on our enemies in a moment. So do not be fearful when you see the enemy coming in like a flood, them using all of these resources to take over. Listen, the Father can turn it so quickly. It's on us. It's imperative for us to turn our hearts back to him, to repent, to turn away from the things that have so easily beset us, those sins, those snares that have fallen upon us so readily, and turn back to him, to study his word, to come to understand, how do we get free from this stuff? Yahuwah did this in a moment. Ezekiel 8-9. These are some crazy chapters, you guys. If you've never read the book of Ezekiel, oh my gosh, it's written to the house of Israel. Like all of us, the scattered sheep that are all over the earth. This is an incredible moment where he gives supernatural insight into understanding all of these secret things that the enemy was doing behind the scenes. He shows you how he deals with it. And it came to be in the 6th year, in the 6th month of the 5th of the new moon, as I sat in my house with the elders of Yahudah sitting before me, that the hand of the master of Yahuwah fell upon me. And I looked and saw a likeness, like the appearance of fire. From his waist and downward, the appearance was like fire. And from his waist upward, the appearance of brightness, like glowing metal. And he stretched out the form of a hand and took me by a lock of my hair. And the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heavens and brought me in visions of Elohim to Jerusalem, to the door of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the image of jealousy was, which causes jealousy. This is like Yahuwah ordaining, lifting somebody up into the spiritual realm. The form of Gnosticism that they pursue, why there's 33 degrees in Freemasonry and all the rest, is because they believe that serpent, that latent serpent energy is going to ascend through the 33 vertebrae of the spine and the coccyx, right? All of these vertebrae, all the way up to the pineal gland to open the third eye, the pineal gland, so we can see into the spirit realm and we can be brought back into the spirit realm like we're supposed to. That is not for us to seek, you guys. There's a reason Yahuwah shut that door down at the garden. There's a reason he closed that door. He's like, listen, you guys aren't going to have access to that kingdom. The only way that that happens is occasionally you'll see the Father can do that for righteous people. We don't seek to go down that pathway through astral projection and through these transcendental meditative practices and taking of all of these drugs to open up pathways to activate our pineal gland like DMT or ayahuasca. We don't engage in that type of stuff because that's stuff that the watchers taught to people, that knowledge, that's some of those secrets of heaven that the fallen angels taught to mankind in order to dial the phone book to get into that realm. Here, Ezekiel is lifted up by Yahuwah in accordance with his plan and taken up through the heavenlies and dropped down into a different place. This is like teleportation, okay? But he does that of his own will. He did this also with Philip at the end of in Acts 8. He also teleported him. Like teleportation is definitely something Yahuwah can do. Got to grow your faith, you guys. Yahuwah is crazy, awesome, powerful, and omniscient, and all more than you could ever imagine. The enemy has counterfeits of that, but he doesn't have anything close to the power that Yahuwah has, which is why like your prayers should get a lot bigger, a lot mightier, a lot more bold and brave, because he's about to expose the works of the kingdom of darkness, and he's literally picking up one of his servants. He's like, I'm going to use you to see all of these things, to be a witness of the works of wickedness that have been going on behind the scenes. And see, the esteem of Elohim of Yisrael was there, like the vision that I saw in the plain. And he said to me, Son of man, please lift your eyes towards the north. And I lifted my eyes northward, and north of the slaughter place gate I saw this image of jealousy in the entrance. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations which the house of Yisrael are doing here, driving me away from my set apart place? And you are to see still greater abominations. Then he brought me to the door of the court, and I looked and saw a hole in the wall. And he said to me, Son of man, please dig into the wall. And when I dug into the wall, I saw a door. And he said to me, Go in and see the evil abominations which they are doing there. And I went in and looked and saw all kinds of creeping creatures, abominable beasts. It's like hybrids. This is not just some kind of like, oh, like gross stuff. These are literally like creatures from the pit of hell. These are genetic aberrations. These are horrible, evil stuff. When people start manipulating the genetics, they augment all of those creatures of creation in an insanely disgusting way. This is what he's seeing, you guys. This is the fruit of what these necromancers engage in. This is the fruit of genetic experimentation. And we are living in a time right now. Like I was just reading an article. They're messing with microbes in a unique way right now and about to release genetically engineered microbes like bacteria. Understand something. You can't get that back. As soon as they release this stuff, like back in the early 90s, they wanted to release in early 2000s, they wanted to release genetically engineered microbes that would convert their waste material would be alcohol. And they're like, oh, we can use this for farmers. They can like break down this alcohol. They can break down like your scraps in your fields instead of just plowing them under or burning them. Instead of just doing that, why don't you guys rake them into a pile, put them into a gigantic container, put this bacteria, genetically engineered bacteria in there. It'll convert it into alcohol. The waste material come out, you'll have alcohol you can run your tractors with, and then you can take all of that waste material, put it on your fields because it's like a compost. And they're like, great, that'll be great. As soon as you take that bacteria out and it produces and reproduces itself, bacteria like to exchange genetic information with other bacteria. It's like what they do. When you eat genetically modified food, it exchanges genetic material inside this, especially your gut biome. It augments your DNA. Understand, like if there's two major things, like we are huge advocates for people stopping immediately in their life, is tap water, genetically engineered foods. Like stop them completely. Do whatever it takes to get them out of your diet immediately. You'll immediately have a change in your life. I'm telling you, physiologically, you cannot believe the difference you will feel in your body, your mind too, because your guts are literally what wire up so much of your brain's ability to think and function and communicate and articulate and reason. As soon as you stop those things in your life, especially tap water, there's like hydrofluorosilicic acid, causes inflammation in your brain, kills brain cells when you drink it, fluoride, right? But these are like, there's 44 different chemicals, sometimes 400 different chemicals of these heavy metal wastes that are dumped into your drinking water. Hazardous stuff that eats concrete. It'll eat holes in concrete. If you brush your teeth with toothpaste that has fluoride in it, right? Look at the bottom. Look at it. On the bottle, it's going to say, if swallowed, contact poison control immediately. But if you drink a glass of water that's been fluoridated, you're drinking 4 times as much in that glass of water as what you're getting in that toothpaste, which is 100% poison. That's scary stuff, you guys. That's like reality. This is like the world we live in. If you cut that stuff out of your life, it will help you to be able to contend against the kingdom of darkness in a powerful way. Seriously, just consider, you guys, because that exchanging of genetic material that's taking place with bacteria, when it starts to take place inside your gut, it augments the stuff that's in your gut and it changes it. Taking of these different pharmaceuticals, these different drugs, their derivatives are literally coming from this. They're genetically altering bacteria, algae. They're augmenting things like yeasts to produce pharmaceutical drugs. Okay. They're literally making milk proteins, synthetic human proteins like breast milk proteins to come out of a cow's milk so that they can then synthesize that and use it in products. This is synth milk, like is another one that's being put out right now. If you go to the store and you're like, oh, look, plant-based milk. Understand something. It's not, you shouldn't think of plant-based stuff as like plants that grow with green leaves, chlorophyll. Think of industrial chemical plants, heavy waste processing facilities. That's what you should think of. Think of a fallen angel sitting over the shoulders of somebody who's a genetic experimentation, hacking the human genome project, and they're like trying to convert us into this horrible dragon-like system. That's what you should think of when you see like plant-based. So many of them are that. I'm not trying to deride on people that are like on a healthy approach towards vegetarianism or veganism. I'm not trying to deride that. Understand, I'm trying to give people an understanding of literally what's taking place in their food supply, because they're blindly following the blind. They're going to fall into a pit. If you're not actually taking cautionary steps towards eliminating these things out of your diet, understand you are going to be led down a horrifically bad road, physically as well as spiritually. It does pollute you. It corrupts you. It's augmenting you. It's physically changing your DNA right now. It's a reality. Like there's a major war against your body. There's a major war against your soul. There's a major war against your spirit. And they're working in every angle to destroy you, to turn you into an abomination. This is what Ezekiel is seeing in the temple. This is what people for thousands of years have seen take place around them. We just grew up in a society that didn't talk about it. We grew up in a society that didn't warn you about it, that didn't teach you to take proactive steps to guard yourself from it. I wish so bad that the pastors that I had growing up would have warned me not to eat those foods, not to inject these things into my body, because I could have had a much better, a much healthier constitution. Like my wife and I battle health stuff, horrible health stuff for many years of our life, in a long time. She is still, because of the mold in particular, horribly struggling with health issues. Okay. What the mold did in her body, in the girls too, in my daughters, it devastated their bodies in a bad way. Mold is a horrific issue in people that are generally totally unaware of, and they don't even have a category to deal with it. But it wrecked her entire immune system. But it had cleared out everything from the RV, and we stripped out the carpeting, and we were able to pull everything back, and it kind of revealed all that was going on in there. And it was way worse than we realized. We had no idea how bad it had gotten. And I think when your house gets in water damage of whatever kind, and it's one thing, when your RV gets it, it's like really difficult to stop it. It's hard to keep the water out. And this has been like one of their wettest years in a long time. And we've gotten a lot of water damage in the RV, and mold has just been sprouting up underneath in places we couldn't see, everywhere, from Jubilee's bed to under Naomi's bed to around our bed and in the living room and across, I mean, it all over.
It was in way more places, I think, than we had even realized. Clearly, like I didn't know it was up in Jubilee's bed, and it was over in there's an electronic console kind of right by my captain's chair where I ride when we're driving down the road, and you said that was just like the whole thing was just like full of mold. It's depleted, and I was like, would just get sick every couple of months, like with like a cold, you know, like just all these same symptoms, like sinus congestion. It always is like sinus congestion, runny nose, itchy nose, sneezing, fatigue. And then it goes down into my lungs, and it just acts and presents like a cold virus. But I would have it sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks, and it would take, or longer, and it would take a while to flush my sinuses and kind of get me feeling, you know, better. And then it would just resurface again like a month later. And I was like, why do I keep getting this? It's just like my immune system has no, you know, stability or backing to it. And it's just like super weak. And I just keep getting something new like all the time, and just I don't know, like that became really wearying too. And then I think once I was pregnant, I didn't realize too that someone had mentioned that, or you had mentioned that mold binds with estrogen in the body, and that's why it can affect women more. So pregnant women, of course, are going to be more affected because they have a higher amounts of all kinds of hormones. And, and then I had a year where I had a couple miscarriages too, so there's a bunch of hormones. And
you get super sick right around that when you would get pregnant.
Oh, yeah. Just, I don't know. I was just perpetually in a state of unwellness for years, kind of on and off, until I with this pregnancy, and it's just been getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I just want to not be in so much pain. To the point where we are now. To where this has probably been the sickest I've ever been in my life, like long term. And it has been just quite exhausting and wearying. But it definitely, I can't imagine, especially after seeing all the footage of all of the mold, like, I just can't imagine having to go back into that space and having the potential of something coming back, which, people always say, like, mold is really hard to get rid of.
But it had started that process years before through a lot of the practices of what the medical establishment was requiring her to do in order to be in that job, in that career field. It devastated her. It changed her physically, and the way that she grew up and the types of food that her family ate. Like, her mom's favorite food to cook for her family was takeout. So you can imagine what my wife's gut health was like when I met her. She was bad. She was bad. She used to eat out constantly, right? It was horrible. She lived a very unhealthy lifestyle, and it contributed to a lot of factors of stuff we deal with today, decade later. Okay. But if you can make those changes early on, as soon as you're capable, or for those for your children, you're setting them up with a much better foundation. Like, we did a complete sugar fast for, 50 days now, something like that. Even maple syrup and honey, because we used to drink tons of that too. I just drink it right out of the bottle, slamming it. Anyways, I was like, I'm using it for my detox protocol. I just love maple syrup. But it was amazing at what could happen in our bodies through the elimination of just one contributing factor to this entire equation of what's causing us problems in our body. But we're like on a path to try to restore our health. We're trying to like regain the wisdom that's been lost from us, obscured from us, that's been collectively shielded from us, because we have to find a way to fight effectively this war that we are in, this great war of the ages. And I really believe guarding the temple of our bodies, eating the way that he told us to eat from the scriptures, living out the way that he told us to live, it's the way that we fight back. It's the way that we raise up a children and a generation that's set apart, that's distinct, because I don't want my children to be plagued with these same issues that I had growing up. I don't want them to carry on these generational problems that I've had because my family ate that way and because my grandfathers ate this way. I don't want it to be like that. I want to break that generational curse. And abominable beasts and all the idols of the house of Israel carved all around on the walls, and facing them stood 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel. And in their midst stood Yozinyahu, son of Shaphan. Each one had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the dark, each one in the room of his idols? For they say, Yahweh does not see us. Yahweh has forsaken the land. And he said, you are still to see greater abominations which they are doing. So now do you have a better understanding of what's in a house of idols? You see how it's not just a bunch of clay figurines and tablets sitting on the walls, but understand they're in a house of idols. Because if every father followed after the ways of his father, they would sacrifice one of their sons to keep up the teraphim, to enlarge their state of idols. This is why a house of idols was extremely valuable to these people, because they carried on the idols of their ancestors. They had rooms of the generations of the firstborn. That's what they had on their walls. That's when you entered into the house of idols. That's what you're walking into. And a house, when they would light up their incense, when they would light up their candles, understand that these things would speak to them. They would walk into a room where many voices of the Elohim, the gods, would talk to them. These houses of idols still exist. This is what these priests in these divine sects of society go into to commune with the immortals behind the scenes. They walk into the places where they have preserved these in their catacombs. This is why they preserve the dead. This is why they're necromancers, because they need to have the phone book. They still need to have their ways of dialing the demons to find out what it is to do. And these things still talk to them. This was taking place in the temple of Yahuwah on the earth. The priests were that far gone. This is what's taking place underneath our churches today. Inside our churches are people that still practice these mystery religions. The elders of our churches, the bishops, the deacons, the cardinals, the popes, they are infected with this same doctrines of demons. That's why sexual immorality can prosper, because it's adultery. It's spiritual idolatry that these people are completely taken captive to. They're still hooked on these drugs and they can't get off of it. This is why it's an absolute kingdom battle. And he brought me to the door of the north gate of the house of Yahuwah, and I saw women sitting there, weeping for Tammuz. If you don't know who Tammuz is, this is where Catholics get the tradition of Lent, okay? Because Catholic ideology, I know it masquerades as if it's talking about Jesus and Mary. It's really talking about Tammuz. That's like the naked baby Jesus character you see all the time, this woman holding her and weeping for her. That is Ishtar and Tammuz, Semiramis, the goddess. That's why it's the Ishtar. That's why people celebrate Easter. That's what they're celebrating. They're worshiping a totally different religion. They have a false Trinitarian doctrine and ideology. That's these gods. This is the children of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Tammuz is this child that came from the sun god, this reincarnation of Nimrod, basically after he died, that this virgin child gave birth to it. Semiramis was like the whorelet. She was like the whore. But then she rebirthed herself after Nimrod died, and she's like this virgin character. And the rays of the sun fell on her in her womb. That's why you'll see at the Vatican, you'll see the big womb, and then you'll see the phallus of these giant obelisks in front of it, because that's the rays of the sun that came upon her. And then she gave birth to this child, Tammuz. Well, Tammuz was killed by a boar, the story goes. That's why on Lent, they're like, we abstain from eating meat. And then they consecrate themselves after their 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, where they rub the ashes of those children and the people that have been sacrificed and burnt up. They rub those ashes on their forehead in the sign of the cross. And then they literally consecrate the end of that with a great feast by eating a pig, a swine. That's to be like, we got back at that boar that killed Tammuz. That's where all these traditions come from. And I grew up in Christian churches that practice that same kind of stinking garbage. You know what I'm saying? You're like, what the heck? That's worshiping Elohim in a way that he said, don't do that. These people are literally, he's saying the abominations of weeping for Tammuz, that's worse than what those priests were doing by worshiping in their house of idols. Do you understand how horrifically bad this is? But let me show you. He's like, hey, there's worse things still. Hang in there. This is all in the house of Yahuwah, by the way. Don't forget it. Don't lose sight of that. That means that's where it's going to be today, because everything we're reading about back then is still happening today. It never changes, because people, unfortunately, are still being beguiled in the same way. If somebody came up to you and is like, hey, I'll give you $570 million for you to bow down and light some incense in front of this thing, and you're in. There's a lot of people who'll be like, heck yeah, I don't care. That's how it starts, you guys. And they just find out what people's prices are, or they find out their vice. And that's how the world carries on in this agenda. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? You are to see still greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of the house of Yahuwah. And there at the door of the Hakal of Yahuwah, between the porch and the slaughter place, were about 25 men with their backs towards the Hakal of Yahuwah, and their faces towards the east. And they were bowing themselves eastward towards the sun. This is literally the Luciferians. These are like all of those. This is it. This is like the 1,000 points of light. Let me just show you this. Our president is very famous for referencing the 1,000 points of light in his speeches. This is the spirit of globalization, where it comes from. I'm going to read the very beginning. This is chapter 76 from the Genesis 6 conspiracy. If you pay attention to globalist allegory, you will often hear the phrase 1,000 points of light. What is the implication of this seemingly innocuous poetic prose George Bush Sr. exploited in one of his many illuminated and encrypted speeches to the world? 1,000 points of light is an arcane metaphor symbolizing the promised 1,000-year New Age reign of enlightenment introduced by the end-time religion and world government. It is also figurative language representing the most spurious spark of the divine held within the spirits of mankind. The figurative spark has been disseminated throughout the world over the ages. Polytheists, people who believe in a pantheon of gods, believe this spark is encoded in the DNA of a select elite. It can be released through a connection with the universal life force by uniting the world through a vibrating harmonic convergence. The spark of the divine cannot be ignited unless the people of the world unite under one government in which the Gnostics believe to be their true religion. Once world unity is achieved, the age of enlightenment, seeking gnosis, will begin. The spark of the divine will reunite, permitting the ascension of the initiated elite into godhood. That's what they believe. That's why they're gathering there in Switzerland, to have this unification ritual and understand how they're going to collectively move the world towards this agenda. That's because this is what they get their illumination from. They're driving that way because this is truly what they believe. Fundamentally, behind the scenes of the stuff that you and I don't get to see and watch and hear, the conversations that take place in the inner chambers and those places where they think Yahuwah does not see, he still sees it. And he says everything they've done in secret is going to get brought to the light. This 1,000 points of lights, we are driving through, for example, we are driving through Hot Springs, Arkansas. Unbelievable strong bed. They have like Albert Pike Road. This is like the Freemasonic capital of Arkansas in a lot of the country. This is where, wouldn't you know it, President Clinton, Mr. William, spent a good deal of his time as well. This is an incredibly infiltrated place. Lots of underground tunnels, tons of rituals, unbelievably disgusting, beautiful place. One of the most incredible places I've ever been in the entire country. And it's absolutely sadistically filled with this kind of horrible pursuit. The Luciferians infected this area. That valley, if you guys don't know about Arkansas, I could go off for a little while here. If you're going to go to the Ozarks, you guys, go to Arkansas if you can. I'm just going to highly recommend it. We traveled through that area. We lived in that area for a good long while, but we didn't live in Arkansas enough. We lived in Missouri lots. Arkansas was amazing every time we traveled through there. Beautiful, incredible architecture, or incredible natural landscape. We loved it so much. The amount of crystals and gems and rocks.
Oh my gosh.
Crystals! This is how it's going to come down. Come dig crystals.
Come to Arkansas. Feels a lot better. Oh, it does look like amethyst. Look at the purple clay. I need to eat that. It's delicious. Clay you came from. You're deficient in minerals. It definitely tastes like a little sour, that clay. The other clay tastes more irony, but the purple clay tastes sour. It's delicious. I really hope there's amethyst, Cheld.
Rolls and water was amazing. Absolutely loved it. When we went to Hot Springs the first time, we went crystal mining, stuff like that, because there's just beautiful, perfectly clear crystals popping up out of the ground. There's mountains of crystals, like 27-mile long stream of crystals running under the ground. It's incredible. And then Navaculite, which is one of the most beautiful stones for flint knapping and making your sharp knives out of. I might even have some around here somewhere. Anyways, it's a beautiful stone. They're mountains just made of it. It's what Arkansas sharpening stones come from. Fantastic. One of the best natural stone materials for sharpening your knife with. But we were in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and literally that area, you guys, used to be the gathering place, not just there in Hot Springs, but these medicinal healing waters that were all over, bursting out of the rocks all over the place out there. People from all over the continent for thousands of years used to travel there to gather together and get, there's healing clay. This blue clay is absolutely incredibly healing and medicinal. You rub it on your skin. It takes out mosquito bites and burns, poison ivy. It's also strengthening women that were pregnant and would eat it every day for the minerals in it. It's incredible stuff. The healing waters had all these medicinal properties that transform people. Well, wouldn't you know it, all of these people that were on the quest to come out into the Americas, they were looking for the Fountain of Youth, right? Oh, what's the guy's name? Fernando de Soto. Anyways, he came over here on a quest to find the Fountain of Youth, right? And he was following these legends and these lores about places where you could go in the waters and be completely healed. He pursued this, landed in Florida with a bunch of dogs. It's really important. These dogs were tearing up people, killing them like crazy, just slaughtering the Indians with them. Anyways, he was on this quest going all over the Americas trying to find this fountain of youth. Anyways, he heard basically at the end of the day, that's where it was. So all of these mystics and mystery religions invaded that area over time, and they took it over. And eventually, the National Park Service and other people, they destroyed all of those healing waters, and they literally completely terraformed the area so that all the waters kind of funneled down into one. They ruined it. They ruined it completely. But we were traveling around in that area above there, going to this crystal mine, and I drove by this sign, and I was like, just above Hot Springs, and it said 1,000 Points of Light Community. I'm like, what the heck? What the heck is this? Entire community is consecrated itself as to being part of that initiative, that agenda. You start to find out, hey, yeah, there's literally cities and towns across this country who have initiated themselves under this under this ideological pursuit. And they're like, yep, we're part of that. We're just to put it out there, you guys. When you enter into cities, you can see the secret societies that are like running the city. Welcome to the town. They're like, literally, they'll be like, here's the Freemasons. We have the Shriners here. Oh, yep, we have the Temple of Set, the Temple of Satan. We got all of this stuff right here. They'll literally be like, these are the communities that sponsored the Knights of Columbus. We're like, yeah, this is it. Come on and join us here. We are the governing hand of this society. That's an important, like, telltale sign of like who it is that's running the shots, running the show behind the scenes. Understand, those are the literal agents of evil, and so much of where they come from is these oath-keeping societies that are spawning this vision of this new world order. That's the origin stories of where so much of this lies, and we have an opportunity to try to collectively wage a war against it. This is how we do it, by we expose their tactics. Understand, these are their methods. This is what they believe, so that we cannot be ignorant of their schemes. Because if we continue on in our ignorance, when we see signs like that, we drive by and we have no idea. We have no idea why it's so important to ask the Father to forgive the sins that these people are committing, to ask him to forgive the sins that have been committed in the surrounding area. That's how we start to break this generational iniquity off, that the Father would indeed pardon these sins that have taken place there, because that's how we unplug them from that power source. That's how we literally cure this cursed waters. It's like the Messiah literally gave us the cure from the wood of the cross. Like, he literally gave us the cure from that place. The people, when they were wandering in the wilderness, they got to these waters of Mara, and they're like, oh my gosh, the waters are bitter. It's like Maraba is what they call it. And they're like, the waters are poison, we can't get it. And it says Yahuwah answered Moses as he cried out to him, and he showed him a tree. He threw it in, a branch of it, into the waters, and it was healed. That's literally, like, the Messiah literally has done that for us. He's given us the opportunity to come into an area where the waters are poisoned, where the food is poisoned, where the air is poisoned, and the clothes are poisoned, where the minds of people have been taken captive and they're completely poisoned. And you know what? We can preach to them the gospel of the kingdom. We can show them the way back to the source, the fountains of living waters, and they can become the sources of freedom for others. They can get set free. We can walk in the authority and the anointing that we were given from the beginning and the foundations of this world, and we can begin to set captives free. That's what we're here to do. We are supposed to be agents of righteousness on this earth, advancing the kingdom of courage in the face of a world of compromise and cowardice. And as we do that, the Father will give us what we need in order to be successful in our endeavors. He will give us the resources that we need mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially. He will equip us with what we need for food and clothing and shelter. He will provide for us everything we need in order to be successful in our endeavors. You must understand, he really is for us. And if he is for us, who can be against us? Whether thrones or powers or principalities or rulers, if he is for us, no man can be against us. Literally, at the name of Yeshua, every knee in heaven and in earth and under the earth has to bow. They will submit to his authority. He will put all of his enemies under the feet of Yeshua. He really is going to do it. And he has done it by the authority of our great creator. He has subjected these principalities to the authority of Yeshua. And that is why we must serve in his kingdom with boldness, with confidence, that though we see these schemes of the devil, understand it should not make us fearful. It should not make us trepidatious. It should not make us want to turn back at the sight of our enemies. But instead, we must understand that behind their great veil is an illusion of power. Behind their veil is iniquity, rebellion, sin, and transgression. And you know what? He came, our Messiah conquered death. He conquered death, and Yahuwah raised him by his power and seated him at his right hand. And because of that, we have boldness that we might not need to turn back in the day of battle, but we can confidently stand and say, may Yahuwah arise. May his enemies be scattered. May those who hate him flee before his face. And he will rise with us to help us go out and conquer our adversaries for the kingdom of righteousness' sake. I love you guys. I hope you have a fantastic and incredibly tenacious day. Go out and wage your war for the kingdom of righteousness. Love you all. I'll talk to you soon.